You love her voice, you love her looks. What Melissa loves are comic books like these ones back here. We're going to be talking about Star Ranger Funnies tonight, and we're going to be talking about that because this is part of the ongoing series I've been doing, where I've been talking about the rest of the comic book industry and how for the rest of 1938 it basically did not respond to Superman as if it had never happened. And here we are. This is the last of the titles that, at least numbering wise, existed before Superman debuted in Action Comics #1. So we're going to go over this today, and it's not a great title, but there's a lot of important people in it, and that's why we're going to pause and talk about this today to see where those important people are at this time. So let's check my notes. I have a cat between me and the computer right now, so it's hard for me to see what's on the bottom of the screen. Today, we return to Centaur Comics to discuss Star Ranger, or rather what became of it in 1938. The title was always confusing. Is Star Ranger a sci-fi hero? It sounds like he'd be a cool sci-fi hero. But no, it was a cowboy comedy anthology. So after Star Ranger #12, it was decided to change the name of the title to Cowboy Comics. This lasted for 2 issues, neither of which I have access to. So we're going to gloss over those and talk about what came next when the title changed again to Star Ranger Funnies, which kept the continuity with the original title, but with the explanatory note at the end of it that this was meant to be funny. So as I mentioned, there was a lot of creative people involved in Star Ranger Funnies, and some of them I've already talked about, so we're not going to go into a lot of biographical details of them here. Some of them I plan on doing more elaborate episodes about in the future, so we're still not going to talk about them a lot here, but there are a few people that I'm going to talk about in depth here, and we'll get to them really soon. Uh, Home in the Ozarks was an attempt to make a Lil Abner clone, even more over the top and insulting to hillbillies. In it, Duddy wants to court. Sorry, there's a cat in my way. Pansy, but his cousin Snap expects him to court his daughter Fanny instead. Hijinks and Tom and Jerry level violence ensues. Slim Pickens is a one-page gag strip about a newspaper man named Slim Pickens in a western town working on the Daily Squeal. Home in the Ozarks and Slim Pickens. Lois. Come on, Lois. Everybody's waiting. You wanna get in front of the camera so everyone can see you? Lois doesn't like to be picked up. But you also don't want to move out of my way so I can read the screen, do you? For the moment, she's moved. To be fair, I'm usually not recording this time of night, so she thinks this is normal for her to be up on the computer in front of me. What was I talking about? Right. Home in the Ozarks and Slim Pickens were the work of Jack Cole. Jack Cole started working for Ultim before it was Centaur Comics in 1937, and simultaneously has been doing cartoons for Judge Magazine. By the end of 1939, Cole will have diversified and be simultaneously working for Centaur, Lev Gleason, and MLJ. For Lev Gleason, he will create The Claw, one of the most significant villains created for the golden age of comics. But his real claim to fame is coming later when he creates Plastic Man. Lion Lou was the work of Fred Gardner. His realistic artwork, a poor match for a humor filter about exaggerated lying. We know Gardner had already loved her detective comics, so this is likely from a stockpile of material that he'd left for Centaur. And that's all I have to say about that. And then we get something completely new for Star Ranger, and that is a serial adventure with an action hero, and it's an unusual one. The Ermine is a frontiersman living in the Allegheny Mountains of what will become West Virginia sometime around 1850, I think. The Thorne family is farming land that doesn't belong to them, although the story doesn't make a big deal about that. The these are the good guys in this story, and the Native Americans are the bad guys. The Native Americans are the Iroquois, so we know some actual historical accuracy and research went into this. They surround the house and attack and kidnap the daughter Alice. During the siege of the house, Braves start to notice that some of their ranks are disappearing and being picked off and found dead, with ermine tails clenched in their hands, the sign of the ermine. To the Thorns, the ermine is just a legend of a scout said to be able to appear and disappear as if by magic, sort of like what Batman does later, and is said to kill just for the sake of killing. So, despite being the good guy, he's not trusted and treated like a criminal. In the second installment, the Ermine is tracking the raiding party that kidnapped Alice Thorne and picking off stragglers. When Red Feather, leader of the raiding party, gets home, the chief is livid that Red Feather has likely led the Ermine there. To flush the Ermine out, they decide to burn Alice at the stake to see if the Ermine comes out and tries to rescue her. The Ermine, a clever idea of creating a mystery man with all the tropes of that genre, but transported back in time 80 years. It was the creation of George and Martin Filchock. Martin started drawing filler for Comics magazine back in 1936 and got a chance to draw his first adventure hero, Bob Colby, in 1937. For most of 1938, he was back to doing filler material until the Ermine. Ermine is an interesting curiosity to look at today, but it wasn't selling a lot of comic books back then. Centaur gave him another chance with something closer to the superhero genre, Mighty Man, but Filchock would never go on to become a big star in comic books. Martin also created filler material like One Buck and Two Bits and How to Draw, which are featured in these issues. His brother George had written two stories for Comics magazine in 1937, but his next work was writing the Ermine for Martin to draw. George didn't work on Mighty Man, dropping out of comic books after the Ermine. Wild West Jr. was humor filler created by Charles Biro. Biro started doing filler material for the Chesler Studio in 1937, and throughout 1938, the closest he'll come to landing a regular feature was Foxy Grandpa. At the end of 1939, for MLJ, he will invent his most promising character, Corporal Collins, and will go on to eventually create his most famous character, Crimebuster. Will Eisner was reprinted in these pages. Centaur is going to become really big into reprinting its old inventory of stories, but this is an early example of it. And I think I've already talked about Will Eisner at Centaur Comics, so we're not going to go into a lot of detail about that here. In fact, I'm done talking about him. Paul Gustavson did joke filler like Spurs and Medicine Man, both featured in these issues. Gustavson started working for Ultim in the previous year, doing nothing but gag filler until the end of the year when he got to do a serious one-shot story for Star Ranger. In the fall of '38, Gustavson creates his first promising action hero, the Arrow, for Funny Pages. Joining the Funnies Inc. studio in early 1939, this will give Gustavson his first chance to make filler that will appear in books published by Detective Comics. While for Centaur, he will create my favorite of his characters, the Phantom of the Fair, and later will create his most successful character, the original Angel, for Timely Comics. I haven't got to mention Joe Buresch in way too long. One of my favorite cartoony artists to debut in Comics magazine. Its first feature had been Hezzy of the Hills back in 1936. Other continuing features he created were Jimmy and Jean and the Cowboy feature Buck Bush. But most of his work was one-shot stories, some of them very enjoyable, and ones I've reprinted in my own books. He continued to work on these, plus more one-shots and filler material, until mid-1937, when he dropped out of comic books. By 1941, he must have signed up for the Army because he was soon working for a magazine called Army Laughs. He did cartoon work for many years, but never went back to comic books. And the reason I mention him at all this time is because his very first Buck Bush story was reprinted in Star Ranger Funnies. As I said, they're moving towards a lot of their inventory to fill page count instead of commissioning a lot of new material. And that was it. That is all I have to say about Star Ranger Funnies. And that is the last, as I said, of the titles that was already ongoing numerically before Superman and continued through the rest of the year during Superman's rise to fame. Now, the next thing we're going to do is actually go back to talking about Superman. I know it's been a while. I've covered a lot of other material, and I think it was all important. But now we're going to go back to the next issues of Action Comics and get a feel for what's going on there. So I hope that you'll join me, and I'll see you then. Have a great night, and bye-bye. Right, Lois?